The day began like any other in the village of Ilu Odo, a peaceful settlement surrounded by lush forests and crisscrossed by the life-giving river. The morning sun bathed the earth in golden light, and the women gathered by the riverbank to fetch water, gossip, and prepare for the day's work. Among them was Asake, a woman of wisdom, loved by her people for her calm demeanor and knowledge of ancient ways. She had always been different. Her connection to the spirit world was something even the village elders marveled at. But today, Asake carried a weight no one could see. She had dreamt of death, not someone else's, but her own. In the dream, she stood alone on the edge of the river, gazing across the waters that shimmered in the moonlight. On the opposite bank, her ancestors appeared in the mist, their voices soft yet urgent, calling her name. They told her the time had come for her to join them. In the dream, she felt no fear, only a deep, inevitable acceptance. Awakened in the early dawn, Asake could still hear their voices in her head. She sat up on her bamboo mat, the coolness of the morning air brushing against her skin, and stared out into the village, where the huts stood like silent guardians of the past. The dream had shaken her, but it was not a surprise. She had always known that one day she would receive such a message. In her family, the women were gifted with sight beyond the living world, visions of what was to come, of both joy and sorrow. It had been passed down from mother to daughter for generations. Yet, foretelling one's own death was rare. She rose quietly, careful not to wake her daughter, Erelu, still fast asleep on the mat beside her. Asake's thoughts swirled like the early morning mist over the river. How would she prepare her daughter? How would she prepare the village for what was to come? There was much to do, and little time. Later that morning, as the villagers went about their routines, Asake sought the counsel of the village elders, her heart heavy with the knowledge she carried. Sitting before the council under the ancient baobab tree, she recounted her dream, sparing no detail. The elders listened intently, their faces grave. They were well aware of the significance of dreams in their culture. Dreams were the whispers of the spirits, the messages of the ancestors, not to be taken lightly. Elder Adebayo, the most senior of the group, leaned forward, his voice steady but cautious. Asake, dreams are powerful, but they do not always mean what we think. The ancestors speak in riddles. But Asake shook her head. This dream was clear. My ancestors are calling me. I felt it. The other elders exchanged uneasy glances. Chief Adetoye, the village leader, broke the silence. If the spirits have indeed called for you, we must respect their will. But the village needs you. You are our guide, the light for many. Are you certain of this? Asake nodded slowly, her gaze steady. I am certain. The council fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words sinking into the earth beneath them. They understood now that her journey was set and there was no turning back. Asake left the council with the reluctant blessing, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. Walking back to her home, she glanced at the familiar faces of her fellow villagers, the children playing in the dirt, the women weaving baskets, the men repairing fishing nets. She knew they would be lost without her, but she also knew that this was the way of life. The river flows, the seasons change, and no one can stop the cycle of life and death. That night, as the village quieted and the stars blinked down from the heavens, Asake lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of her daughter beside her. The dream was still vivid in her mind, but now she understood its message. Her death was not something to be feared, but embraced. It was the beginning of a new journey. Yet she wondered how the village would cope without her. Would they remember her wisdom? Would they understand the legacy she was leaving behind? The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the village. Asake closed her eyes, her thoughts turning to the future. She would spend her remaining time preparing the village, preparing her daughter. There was much to teach, much to say before the ancestors called her away. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth as Asake made her way into the sacred forest at dawn. It was a place no one ventured unless they sought answers from the spirits. Towering trees rose like silent sentinels, their ancient trunks entwined with creeping vines, while the canopy above shielded the ground from the bright sunlight. Here, the air felt different, denser, heavy with a presence that was not human, but otherworldly. Asake moved carefully, her bare feet gliding over the familiar path that led deeper into the forest. She had come here many times in the past, seeking guidance, solace, and connection with her ancestors. But today was different. Today, the forest felt like it was waiting for her. At the heart of the forest lay the Grove of the Ancestors, a small clearing where a circle of ancient stones stood, each one carved with the faces of those long gone. This was a sacred place, a place where the spirits of the dead could speak to the living. Asake knelt before the stones, her heart filled with both reverence and trepidation. She closed her eyes and whispered the sacred incantations passed down through generations of women in her family. Her voice, steady and clear, mingled with the rustling leaves and the distant calls of birds. The forest seemed to breathe around her, the trees swaying as though in response to her call. Then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Asake remained still, her breathing shallow as she waited. And then, slowly, the wind began to change. It blew through the trees, stirring the leaves in a circular motion around her, until the air in the clearing hummed with energy. Asake opened her eyes. Before her, a faint mist began to rise from the ground, swirling and shifting until the outlines of figures appeared. The ancestors, the spirits of those who had gone before her. Their faces were solemn, their eyes like pools of deep wisdom, seeing beyond time and space. They did not speak, but Asake knew they were waiting for her. "I know my time is near," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I have accepted it, but what I do not understand is why. Why must I leave now, when the village still needs me?" The mist swirled again, and the figure of a woman stepped forward. Asake recognized her at once, her great-grandmother, Iyabo, the woman who had passed down the gift of sight to Asake's mother and then to her. Iyabo's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it echoed through the grove. "Your time has come, Asake, not because it is the end, but because it is the beginning of something new. Your death will bring change to the village, a change that is needed for them to grow." Asake frowned. "Change? What kind of change?" "The village will face hardship," Iyabo continued, "but through your death they will find strength. Your daughter will rise to take your place, and through her the village will learn new ways, new wisdom. This is your purpose now, to prepare them for what is to come." Asake's heart ached at the mention of her daughter, Erelu. She had hoped for more time to teach her, to guide her. Erelu was still young, still untested. How could she bear the weight of such responsibility? "She is not ready," Asake whispered. "She will be," the voice of her great-grandmother assured her. "You have taught her more than you realize. The spirits will guide her, just as they have guided you. But you must be the bridge between the old and the new. Your death will open the way." The mist began to thin, and the figures of the ancestors slowly faded back into the swirling fog. But before they disappeared completely, Iyabo spoke one final time. "Remember, Asake, death is not an end. It is a journey, a step into the eternal. Fear it not. Embrace it as part of your destiny." Asake bowed her head, feeling both the weight of her responsibility and a strange sense of peace. She knew now that her death was not simply a loss, but a part of a greater plan for her people. Rising from the ground, she wiped her hands on her wrapper and slowly began the journey back to the village. As she walked through the forest, the whisper of the spirits lingered in her ears. The words of her ancestors were playing in her mind. She would not tell the village everything. Some things were not for them to know yet, but she would begin preparing them. She would plant the seeds of knowledge, wisdom, and resilience in her daughter and in the hearts of those she loved. By the time she emerged from the sacred forest, the sun had risen high in the sky, casting long shadows across the village. Asake paused at the edge of the trees, watching her people as they went about their daily tasks. There was much to do and little time. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was clear. The spirits had spoken, and she had accepted her fate. Now it was time to set the future in motion. The rainy season had come, and with it, a sense of unease settled over the village of Ilu Odo. Dark clouds hovered in the sky, threatening downpours that never seemed to arrive. The air was thick with humidity, and the once fertile lands around the village were drying up despite the season. Crops withered, animals grew restless, and the river, which had always been a source of life, began to recede unnaturally. The village was unsettled. Asake knew these signs were no coincidence. The spirits had warned her of the coming change, and now it was manifesting in ways that frightened her people. Though the villagers trusted her, their fear was palpable. Whispers of curses and bad omens spread like wildfire, and the elders struggled to maintain order. The villagers turned to Asake, seeking answers, but she kept her silence. She knew what the signs meant, but telling them now would only deepen their fear. Instead, she tried to comfort them with practical advice. She encouraged the farmers to conserve what little water they had, and the hunters to seek game deeper into the forest. But even as she spoke, Asake felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her. She could feel her time slipping away like sand in an hourglass. One evening, as the villagers gathered around the communal fire, Asake noticed the nervous glances exchanged between the elders. The flames cast flickering shadows on their faces, revealing the tension they were trying to conceal. Elder Adebayo, his voice low and grave, addressed the gathering. "Our village has survived many trials, but this is different. The river dries, the crops fail, our people are growing fearful. We must seek the cause." The villagers murmured in agreement, their faces tight with worry. Some spoke of angry spirits. Others whispered that perhaps someone in the village had angered the gods. Asake sat quietly watching the flames, knowing what was coming. Chief Adetoye, the village leader, stood and raised his hand for silence. His eyes rested on Asake, and for a moment they locked gazes. She could see the doubt in his expression, the unspoken question he would soon voice. "Asake," the chief began, "you have always guided us through hardship. The spirits speak to you. Do you know why these things are happening?" The crowd turned to her, eyes wide with expectation. She felt their desperation like a heavy weight in the air. They wanted her to reassure them, to tell them that the spirits would protect them, that the rains would come, that life would return to normal. But she couldn't lie to them. Asake stood, the firelight dancing across her face. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. "The spirits have spoken to me, and I have seen the signs. There's a great change coming to our village, one that we must be prepared for." Her words were met with a hush. The villagers leaned in, hanging on her every word. This drought, this unrest, they are not punishments, but warnings. Our village is entering a time of transition. It is a time that cannot be avoided. We must face it with strength and courage. "But why now?" one villager called out. "Why are the spirits angry with us?" "They are not angry," Asake replied, her voice calm but firm. "They are guiding us towards something new, but with that change comes hardship, and we must be ready." She felt her heart quicken as she spoke. The village needed to know the truth soon, but she wasn't sure they were ready. There was still so much they didn't understand. Over the next few days, the tension in the village grew. People became anxious, questioning everything. Was it a sign that they had strayed from tradition? And was the land cursed? Asake retreated further from the public eye, focusing her energy on preparing her daughter for the inevitable. In the evenings, they sat together under the baobab tree, and Asake began teaching Erelu the rituals, the chants, the incantations that had been passed down through their bloodline. Erelu, though young, listened intently, her eyes wide with the seriousness of what she was learning. "Why are you teaching me all of this now, mother?" Erelu asked one night, her voice small in the darkness. "You've never taught me this before." Asake paused, watching her daughter's face, still so full of innocence despite the heaviness around them. "Because, my daughter, there will come a time when you will need to know these things. The village will look to you for guidance, just as they look to me now." Erelu frowned. "But you will still be here, won't you?" Asake smiled sadly and stroked her daughter's cheek. "For a little while longer, yes, but you must be ready." Erelu didn't press further, but Asake could see the worry in her daughter's eyes. She understood the burden she was passing on, and it pained her. But this was the way it had always been. As the days passed, the village's situation worsened. The river continued to dry and the people grew more desperate. The village elders held meetings almost daily, but no solutions emerged. The storm that hovered in the sky seemed to mock them, withholding the rain they so desperately needed. One evening, as the winds began to rise and the skies darkened, Asake felt a shift in the air. The time was approaching. She knew she could not delay any longer. It was time for the village to hear the full truth. time for her to reveal the prophecy that would shake their lives to the core. The gathering storm was not just outside. It was in the hearts of her people, and Asake would soon stand at the center of it. The prophecy. The village square was packed with anxious faces. The air was thick with humidity, and the sky above was an ominous gray, churning with storm clouds that refused to release their rain. Asake stood before the gathered crowd, the familiar weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Beside her, the village elders sat in a circle, their eyes fixed on her. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for. She raised her hand for silence, and the murmurs of the crowd died down, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the baobab leaves. Chief Adetoye nodded to her, signaling that the floor was hers. Asake's heart beat steadily, but she could feel the tension in her bones. The time had come to reveal the truth. My people, she began, her voice clear and strong, though sorrow lay beneath the surface. You have seen the signs. Our crops failing, the river receding, the animals fleeing our lands. These are not the signs of an angry spirit, nor are they a punishment from the gods. These are warnings, and I am here to tell you why. The villagers leaned in, eyes wide with anticipation. Even the children, normally restless at village meetings, were quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. Asake took a deep breath. I have seen my own death. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes widened in disbelief, and whispered voices rose like a wave. The idea of a living person foretelling their own death was unheard of. To predict one's death was to announce the end of an era. She raised her hand again for silence, her gaze steady. I know this is hard to hear, but it is true. The spirits have spoken to me. They have shown me that in 7 days, my time will come. I will leave this world and join our ancestors. A stunned silence followed her words. The wind picked up, swirling the dust in small spirals around the villagers' feet. Chief Adetoye stood, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Asake, you are the heart of this village. How can this be? Is there no way to prevent it? Asake shook her head slowly. There is no way to avoid it. This is my destiny, and it is the will of the ancestors. They have called me, and I must answer. Tears welled in the eyes of some of the villagers. Erelu, sitting in the front row, stared at her mother with a mixture of confusion and fear, her young face pale and trembling. Asake's heart ached at the sight of her daughter, but she knew this was necessary. This was the path she had been given. But my death is not the end, Asake continued, her voice growing stronger. It is the beginning of a new chapter for our village. The spirits have told me that my passing will bring change. Difficult change, but one that will make us stronger. Our village will face hardship, but we will endure, and through it all, we will grow. The villagers listened, their fear mingling with curiosity. Asake could see the doubt in their eyes. How could her death bring anything but grief and loss? The spirits also spoke of my daughter, Erelu, Asake said, her voice softening as she glanced at her child. She will rise to take my place. She will become the guide for this village, as I have been for many years. Erelu's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet her mother's gaze. Asake could feel her daughter's fear, her uncertainty. Erelu was still so young, still untested. The burden was heavy, but the spirits had spoken, and Asake trusted their wisdom. One of the elders, Elder Adebayo, stood slowly, his face lined with concern. Asake, how can we place such a weight on your daughter? She is not yet ready. How can she lead us through this storm? Asake turned to the elder, her voice calm but resolute. She is stronger than you know. The spirits will guide her as they have guided me, and I will teach her everything I can in the time I have left. The village was still. The weight of Asake's words settled over them like a thick fog. Some began to weep quietly, others looked down, unsure of what to say or do. But Asake was not finished. She took a deep breath and continued. I know you are frightened. I know this news is hard to accept, but the future of our village depends on our strength and unity. We must trust in the wisdom of the ancestors. My death is not a punishment. It is a part of the cycle, a necessary step toward our survival. A young man in the crowd stood up, his voice trembling with anger. How can we survive without you? You've always been our guide. Who will protect us from the hardships you say are coming? Asake met his gaze, her expression unwavering. You will protect each other. You will find strength in yourselves and in one another. That is the lesson the spirits want us to learn. My death is a part of that teaching." The wind howled through the trees as if echoing her words. The villagers looked to the sky where dark clouds continued to swirl but refused to burst. The storm was coming, both in the heavens and in the hearts of the people. Asake knew that she had given them what they needed. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was necessary for the village to move forward. She could only hope that in time they would understand the wisdom in her prophecy. As the meeting came to a close, the villagers dispersed, many of them still shaken, unsure of how to process what they had just heard. Erelu remained behind, staring into the fire as if trying to make sense of her new reality. Asake walked over to her daughter and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know this is hard, my child, but you are strong, stronger than you know." Erelu looked up at her mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't want you to go." "I know," Asake whispered, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "But you will carry me with you. I will never truly be gone." As they stood together, the wind howling and the sky darkening, Asake knew that the storm was inevitable. But within that storm, she saw the seeds of renewal, the promise of a future her village could not yet see. Her prophecy had been spoken. Now all she could do was wait for its fulfillment. Fulfillment. The seventh day arrived with a sky heavy and leaden, as though the heavens themselves were mourning the inevitable. The village of Ilu Odo was in a state of subdued unrest, the air thick with anticipation and sorrow. The river, which had once been a symbol of life and abundance, remained stubbornly low, its waters barely a trickle. Asake spent the day preparing for her departure with a quiet dignity. She had gathered her family and closest friends, making sure they were ready for the changes that would come. Her final teachings were both practical and spiritual: how to care for the land, how to maintain the rituals, and how to find strength in the face of adversity. Each lesson was a thread in the tapestry she was leaving behind. Erelu had followed her mother's instructions diligently, though her heart was heavy. She had watched Asake made her final arrangements, like preparing for the moment when she would leave this world behind. Erelu knew the gravity of her new role, but the weight of it seemed almost unbearable. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, Asake called her family and closest friends to the sacred river, the place where her vision had first appeared. The riverbank was lined with lanterns made from dried gourds, their flickering light casting shadows that danced across the water. The villagers gathered, their faces a mix of grief and reverence. Chief Adatoy stood by Asake's side, his own eyes wet with unshed tears. The elders and the villagers looked on, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that this was the end of an era. Asake approached the river, her steps slow but steady. She looked back at her daughter, standing apart from the crowd, her face a portrait of sadness and resolve. Asake's heart ached for Erelu, but she knew her daughter had inherited her strength. Now, it was time for the village to witness the fulfillment of the prophecy. With the evening sky turning shades of deep orange and purple, Asake began to speak, her voice calm and soothing. "My people, today I leave you, but I do not leave you empty-handed. I leave you with the strength of our ancestors, the wisdom of the spirits, and the love of our people. You are strong, and you will overcome the trials ahead." She turned to Erelu, her voice softening. "My daughter, you will lead them now. Remember all that I have taught you and trust in the guidance of the spirits. You are not alone." Erelu nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I will do my best, Mother. I promise." Asake smiled, her heart full of both pride and sadness. She walked to the edge of the river, where the water's edge met the dry riverbed. The village was silent, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, Asake knelt by the river, dipping her hands into the cool, shallow water. She performed the final rituals, her movements steady and deliberate. The river seemed to respond, the waters shimmering slightly as if acknowledging her presence. With a deep breath, Asake stood and faced the villagers. "It is time," she said softly. "The spirits are calling me." The sky above darkened and a gentle breeze began to blow, carrying with it the scent of rain. The villagers watched in reverent silence as Asake closed her eyes, her expression one of serene acceptance. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the villagers looked up in awe. The rain, once absent and elusive, now poured down in steady sheets, soaking into the parched earth. The river began to rise, the water flowing more freely, as if responding to the presence of its guardian. Asake felt the rain on her skin, a refreshing and soothing touch. She opened her eyes, looking at the villagers one last time. "Remember," she said, her voice growing fainter, "my death is a part of the cycle, a step toward new beginnings." The rain continued to fall, washing away the dust and the pain, renewing the land and the people. Asake's breathing slowed, her body growing still as she embraced her final moment. The villagers watched, their hearts breaking but also filled with a profound sense of peace. As the rain fell harder, the waters of the river rose, carrying with them the essence of Asake's spirit. The village felt a shift, a deep sense of renewal and hope as the storm washed over them. The rain brought with it a promise of a fresh start, a chance to rebuild and grow. Asake's body lay still by the river's edge, surrounded by the flickering lanterns. The villagers, though grieving, felt a strange sense of calm. They knew that Asake's death was not an end, but a beginning. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and now they had to honor her legacy by moving forward with strength and unity. In the days that followed, the village began to recover. The rains continued, the river flowed with renewed vigor, and the crops began to grow again. Erelu stepped into her new role as the village guide, her heart full of the lessons and love her mother had imparted. She led with wisdom and compassion, guided by the spirits and the memory of her mother. Asake's story became a legend in the village, a tale passed down through generations. Her life and death were remembered as a powerful testament to the cycle of life and the strength found in embracing one's destiny. The village of Ilu Odo continued to thrive, honoring the memory of Asake and the wisdom she had left behind.